Wagner intercooler stands out because of the tube and fin design. I agree. That's why we like it.
Hmm.
Whereas a majority of competition is bar and plate. Is there any reason for running bar and plate if you are not going to the track? So there is an advantage to bar and plate, and there's an advantage to tube and fin, and it all depends on what you're doing. So if you are going to the track and driving, and you are trying to keep weight off the nose of your car, and you're trying to shed heat as quickly out of the intercooler as it comes in, then tube and fin is typically going to offer you the best performance and results. A tube and fin intercooler could be half the weight of a bar and plate. A nice big bar and plate intercooler in the front could weigh 50 pounds.
They're heavy.
They're very heavy. A tube and fin could be half that. In fact, we used to run an Evo tube and fin intercooler in our A4, and that thing weighed like 9 pounds.
Ridiculous.
So imagine if we had, and we did at one point when we were doing dyno stuff, we had like a 50, 60 pound intercooler. So we
Those are a Garrett 1,000 horsepower
yeah.
core.
So we were able to take 50 pounds off the nose of the car, like out as far as you can put it. Now, if you are doing dyno competitions or you are drag racing, then there's a good argument to be made for bar and plate. The thing that makes bar and plate disadvantageous on track is what gives it the advantage in dynoing or drag racing, the weight. So you have a lot more metal and aluminum in a bar and plate intercooler, and that gives thermal capacity. So, 1 unit of aluminum can absorb a certain amount of heat. The more aluminum there is, the more heat it can absorb. Imagine if you had a block of aluminum that was 10 by 10 by 10, and imagine trying to heat that thing up to 500 degrees. Imagine how much energy it would take to heat a block of aluminum. I mean, you could put so much energy into that block of aluminum. Versus a piece of aluminum foil, you could literally melt it easily in your kitchen.
Same heat source,
Yeah.
Do keep in mind, though, weight and mass is a big factor, but there is a huge discrepancy in how that thermally, how conductive and how quickly they can transfer the heat into that mass, depending on the quality of the core.
Yeah.
The turbulators inside of the tubes going across the intercooler are
Right.
hugely important.
Yeah.
Either tube and fin or bar and plate, and that's usually what separates the wheat from the chaff or whatever you call it. You'll see a lot of cores and intercoolers that look identical on the outside and are terrible performers, compared to the real deal.
And that's why I keep saying generally and
Yeah.
typically, because
There's a lot of
speaking in
nuances
generalizations here. But what Nate is saying is exactly right. You could have a bar and plate intercooler that would perform better everywhere than a poorly designed. An optimal bar and plate is going to be better than a crappy tube and fin. And what you see, and you have to be careful, is when you go out on eBay and Alibaba and these places, it might look nice from the outside. It might be called an intercooler,
It might look identical on the outside,
but it may provide almost no intercooling benefits. Because there's not enough surface area for the air to interact inside the core, and that's how heat goes from the air to the aluminum. Is the air has to interact with the aluminum in a very direct way.
It's a little misleading. It's not literally a tube. You
No.
say tube and fin. It's not just an empty tube across of it.
Well, it is a tube.
It is a tube,
And then it gets filled
There's
with
a lot of stuff in that tube, though.
Yeah, it gets filled with something called turbulators, which are basically little pieces of aluminum that are cut and stamped, and then they're bent out. And so they go inside, and the air has to flow through them and around them, and that's how the heat transfers from the turbulators to the tubes, and then ultimately to the tubes shed the heat to the air flowing through the intercooler. Bar and plate intercoolers don't have tubes. They have literally bars and plates of solid aluminum. So where a tube could be half a millimeter thick, a plate could be 2 millimeters thick. And that's the plate that goes between the rows that the air flows through. So that all of a sudden you have just the structure that makes up the airflow passageways might have 5 times more thermal capacity than, one. But again, like Nate said, if the inside of the core is not designed properly, it doesn't matter. It could literally just, a poorly designed tube is not going to be much better than a straight tube. poorly designed intercooler is not going to be much better than a straight tube.
Yeah. And it's one of these things where a lot of the times you get what you pay for. The cheaper and cheaper you go, it's just they're cutting corners somewhere and making those intricate assemblies inside of the tubes or inside the air paths that still flow properly, that are consistent and seal. It's not an easy thing. So
we will say
they're quite more complex than they appear on the surface.
Wagner has got it right. Their tube and fin stuff is very good. Yeah. It's very optimized, and that's why we keep recommending it. You'll also see tube and fin stuff on almost all factory cars. Or tube and fin. It's very rare to see.
And factory race cars and
factory race cars as well. F1 cars,
back in the day when they were